So our panel is going to consist of
yeah.
Nicholas as a moderator. I'm on it. Carl Greenbaum's on it. Matthew Shaw's on it. And Madison Feehan is on it. But since we're shifting it half an hour up, she may jump in a little bit later. She hasn't shown up yet. So go ahead and turn your cameras and mics on, guys, and we'll get started. The topic for this panel is, what is the most important technology for lunar settlement? Now, we all know that there's a ton of technology that's important, but in your opinion, what do we need to do first? What bit of gear do we need to figure out first?
And since you have your mic on, Carl, you'll get to start.
Oh, sorry, Matt. I must have turned off your. Try that. There we go.
Okay, Matt or Carl, who wants to start?
Well, I think as far as the driving technology for further lunar exploration, I'm with John Young. Dust is the most important problem to solve, and I keep reading about a variety of dust mitigation strategies, but they're all difficult to really verify. But the most interesting recent one, I don't know whether you heard, there's a researcher out in Colorado who is cleaning fabric with nitrogen, liquid nitrogen, because it levitates the dust out of the fabric without tearing up the fabric. So at least in terms of dealing with cleaning off suits, that was an interesting technology. On the larger scale, I think that sintering of the lunar regolith to hold down the dust in areas where you're going to be transiting a lot has some promise, but we have a ways to go to figure out whether we can effectively sinter the lunar surface in a way that works. And so far, I'm aware of just one data point of how much energy it takes to sinter how much regolith, which is the experiment that Dr. Lawrence Taylor did when he put 80 grams of actual Apollo lunar regolith into a microwave oven. So it's a continuing, it'll be hopefully it won't be the long pole in the tent, but there's a lot of work to be done.
Yeah, I agree. That dust is pretty bad news.
Yeah. The liquid nitrogen sounds interesting, except not nitrogen. I guess it's just the cold, so liquid oxygen would do just as well, I presume. Or was it nitrogen as such? Do you know that?
The only thing I know about it is Fraser Kane interviewed this researcher out in Colorado a couple months ago on his podcast. And he was using liquid nitrogen, but that may have been as a matter of convenience. You're right. Any cryogenic fluid might work.
Yeah, it could just be because I haven't looked it up, but it could be nitrogen's easier to cool. Oxygen might require a colder temperature, so it might harder to deal with. Plus, you wouldn't want to. Oh, go on.
Yeah, so for dust mitigation, obviously there's been a lot of surface coating stuff. Current research seems to be on active dust mitigation, so using repulsive electronic fields and that kind of stuff. Although you're right, it's not something that we've got sorted, so it's going to be a massive problem. I would echo Carl there on the sintering. So we do have quite a lot of information about sintering. What we don't have is information about sintering on real lunar dirt. So we use simuants for everything. And we've done pretty extensive work on that. But we know that even just from the simuants, which have a higher thermal conduction than real lunar regolith, it's really hard. So if you wanted to use, direct solar thermal, we did that. We have a really cool looking solar thermal lab down here. And you're talking after hours of sintering temperatures. So you don't want to melt it, but you want to, 1100, 1200 degrees Celsius is what you're aiming for. After like 4 hours of that, you've got a sinter depth of 7 to 8 millimeters, which is not load bearing. It's not useful. It's just for dust mitigation. So if you see these people with rovers, concept rovers of, making a road on the moon or something by just, zapping it with sunlight. That's not really an option with current technology. So that's going to be really difficult.
Yeah, Dr. Taylor believed that the excuse me, the nanophase iron particles in the actual lunar regolith made a huge difference in terms of the thermal energy conduction, and particularly when you microwave it as opposed to when you solar heat it or something like that. But none of the available simulants have that, and so we have to wait till we get some more.
Well, yeah, you're right. The nanophase iron in the regolith is what really gives the microwaves the oomph to heat it up. And yeah, that's really tough to simulate.
Yeah, I did it recognizing the dangers of extrapolating from one data point. I used the heating rates that he developed in the microwave oven and extrapolated that to a microwave heating device that would irradiate the path in front of a rover. And I figured out that on a good day, you could proceed at a kilometer every 6 hours, something like that. So you have to be patient, but you can get it done.
Yeah. Or we could just try to avoid the regolith as much as possible because it's
Yeah,
terrible.
go straight to Mars.
Yeah. Mars has got its own problem with its regolith. Maybe not quite as bad, but it's still got trouble. But
We
yeah,
have had a bit of a parallel discussion in chat here about liquid oxygen and the fabric is not a good idea because the oxygen stays in the fabric and it will combust later.
right. And if you're doing your cleaning inside your pressure hull and you're releasing a lot of pure oxygen, now you're changing your gas balance in your habitat.
And you don't want the dust in the habitat in the first place.
Exactly. And you don't want to blow, liquid oxygen across your material out in the vacuum, because then you just added all kinds of material property problems. So yeah, I don't know if there is any real good solution for the dust.
You certainly don't want to blow the nitrogen out in the vacuum.
Exactly. That would be bad. So yeah, dust. I think you're spot on, Carl. Dust is a huge problem, but I'll put an asterisk by that with if we plan on playing in it. If we don't, then mostly it would be just avoidance. And go on.
It's one of the reasons that I've been trying to gain some traction on this whole idea of microwaving the regolith, both for sintering, but more importantly for resource extraction, for liberating volatiles from the regolith, because you can get the benefits of getting those volatiles without having to excavate tons and tons of regolith and go process it somewhere. I remember I submitted when NASA was doing that Break the Ice Challenge or something like that. And I submitted a proposal that I titled Subdex, which was short for sublimate, don't excavate.
Yeah, I've seen concepts where they tent over the icy regolith and then either pipe in thermal energy or do something to heat it up and then to capture the volatiles, and then just move the tent around instead of actually excavating it. Cool.
Be difficult in terms of pressure, I'd suggest, for those concepts.
Oh yeah, all kinds of challenges doing something like. Forget about the fact that it's extremely cold and we've got like almost no experience dealing in that kind of environment. So that's why when people say, oh well, there's volatiles in the PSRs, we'll go get those. It's like, it's a little more complicated than just going to get the volatiles. It's a whole new suite of technology and experience that we're going to have.
What's 40K among friends?
Yeah, exactly. Well, and if you're in the PSR and you're doing your work and now you're heating up that environment just by being there, now you're just accidentally releasing volatiles that you'd rather be capturing. So it kind of messes up your whole process there.
Well, if it was easy, somebody would have already done it.
Yeah, well, that's true. That's true.
You need to get there first, but yeah.
Yeah, baby steps. So what other technologies do you guys think? Oh, hold on. Philip just had a thing. What do you think using benefication to place larger particles, pebbles, rocks on the ground near entrances to reduce contact with fine particulates?
Potentially an option. The larger rocks, yeah. I mean, again, we'd be separating them out anyway for production processes. So you could potentially use them in that way. Although, again, the issue with the regolith is that it gets pretty dense when you get down, but the very top of it is very fluffy.
Mm-hmm.
So, and we're not entirely sure what the mechanical properties are going to do when we start. So people have said historically, oh, we'll just scrape off the really fluffy bit on top, and then you get left with this really nice dense material. But then we have to deal with how that, because it's not dense in the sense that we normally think of dense material on Earth, which is it's kind of sticky dense. It's as soon as you touch it and start agitating it, it's going to get fluffy again. So we really don't know how that's going to happen. So we could do that. I suspect that the pebbles would kind of just eventually sink into it, and we'd still have dust everywhere. So it would be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah, I think you're right. And there's the whole moonquake issue. You put a bunch of pebbles on top of it, shake it every month for a while, and you're right, the pebbles will just start to sink down into it eventually, and then you'll just have fluffy stuff at the top again. So yeah, interesting, but I'm not sure. Got to look at everything, right? So what other technologies do you guys think we should really be focusing on to get things started? So I'll jump in. I think ISRU is one of the big ones. I mean, if we can't live off the land, then really all you're going to have are bases. You're not going to have settlements. But I think personally, I think that getting iron and oxygen out of the mare basalt should be the first thing we work on, because then we can use the iron for stuff and we have the oxygen for stuff. Seems like the lowest hanging fruit on that.
Very much lowest hanging fruit. I mean, obviously I'm biased, but ISRU is a pretty big option, I would suggest. I think in terms of a more like the techno-economic assessment, using space resources, especially for satellite industry, right? Because the satellite industry is already a massive multi-billion-dollar industry. So if we can prove that, hey, we can make satellite bases and just ship up electronics or something like that, prove a case for using space native resources to launch large satellites or whatever it might be, then you have, because at the moment for ISRU, we have this catch-22, right? It's like, oh, we could try and make it, but we have no customer, and no one's going to develop a business that relies on space resources if there's no one actually using it or producing them yet. So I suggest that satellite industry is probably the predominant one. So that demonstration, that's kind of what CSIRO, NASA, all the space agencies, that's what they're targeting, right? We've got ISRU experiments, and the idea is, well, we show that it's possible. We even upscale that a little bit, show how you would do this on an industrial scale, and then you got to pass it off to industry at some point and say, okay, well, we've shown you how to do it, now you can do it. And then once we've got that going, then the idea of having a lunar settlement is much more likely, right? Because again, we have a reason to have humans up there. We want to make it remotely automated. We want like fully autonomous vehicles and processing options, but from experience, you always need a guy on the ground smacking things with a wrench sometimes. So that is much more likely to happen if we have kind of an economic argument for having ISRU beyond just we want to live on the moon, because that's cool, right, but it's hard to make billions of dollars doing that.
Well, yeah, I mean, especially if the goal is to make billions of dollars. Now, I've always liked the idea of the space solar power satellites. That seems like that would be a really something that people could get behind. Let's build these. Let's see. Ryan said, start with tourism. It will help fund your first settlement.
Doesn't sound like a technology.
Maybe. It really depends on the cost, right? I mean, most of us aren't have the resources to pay for a seat at the moment. Maybe eventually it'll come down to a reasonable price.
Yeah.
And then
Right.
what do you guys think? Tourism, is that the key thing? Should we be focusing on that? It's not really a tech, but it requires tech.
Yeah, it's certainly a good argument for making, at least a base size. Like, again, settlement, I would suggest it's kind of bigger, larger view. But if you want to just, like the ISS, right? We've got tourists going to the ISS now. And if Musk is already planning on sending people around the moon in Starship, then it makes sense to have some sort of lander that they could go stand on the moon, take some selfies with.
Right.
So I suspect that that'll be a big thing.
But do you think that's really is it really tourism if only multimillionaires or people supported by multi-billionaires can do it? I'm not sure that qualifies as tourism.
Yeah, it would come down in price over time, right?
Still tourism, but yeah, it's a niche.
Yeah, exactly. Let's see. Brian asks, what about glass as a building material?
Philip filled in, fiberglass could be an early product.
I guess it
Kind
depends.
of part of the same.
I guess it depends if you're talking about glass or fiberglass, because there is glass in the regolith. I'm just not sure how you'd effectively extract it, refine it, and then use it.
So I mean, obviously we can make glass from it. It's not the type of glass that you would like. It's not going to be clear glass, right?
Right.
Because if you look at the glasses that we make from complex silicates, they're pretty foggy. If you're going to make a large amount of it, you could definitely make some. The interesting challenge there is to make a glass, we need rapid thermal gradients, and that's harder in a vacuum because it's insulating. So you need to work out ways of extracting that heat really quickly. So so we have glasses naturally in the regolith because of the meteoric impacts being extremely high temperature. So you can definitely make them. But as far as I'm aware, the only significant research done into glass use has been in terms of like 3D printing with basalt fibers. So not fiberglass, that's different, but basically using a molten silicate and printing with it, and you get a glassy type substance or amorphous substance coming out.
So what do you think, Nicholas, Carl?
I have a couple of other suggestions for important technologies.
Sure.
I'm a bit biased. I'm thinking production technology. So to make solar panels, photovoltaics, because in order the power generation is a key, and if we're not going to import generators, then it is essentially the sun that is available, and that's photovoltaics or thermal engines. We have a temperature difference of 300 degrees as well. So what do you think about power generation, and how can we use ISRU for that?
Yeah, if you look at Blue Origin's Blue Alchemist program, they're claiming, they haven't released any details yet, but they've said that they can make small solar panel-esque type devices using just regolith material. Again, we haven't been able to grill them on exactly what the process they're using, although I assume it's an electrolysis process of some variety. But we have all the components, well, some of the components. So we have the silicon. We don't have metallurgical grade silicon, but we have silicon. We have iron and aluminium. We would probably need to ship up some bits and pieces to finish off the solar panels, but it's definitely one of the bigger options. Space-based solar power is, it's difficult at the moment. There's lots of people looking into it, but certainly if we can make bulk solar panels on the moon, then that's, you're right, that's going to be a massive step forward.
Yeah, I saw a presentation a couple of years ago by a company that in Texas, I think, that has a little rover, they claim, that can roll through the regolith and deposit solar panels behind it as it processes its way. So that would be pretty nifty.
Houston University, I think.
Oh, is that it?
Yeah, I had contact with a couple of Alexes there. I don't remember their last name, but there were two Alex.
Alex Ignatieff, yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah, I
great.
read that paper. And it's an interesting concept. Unfortunately, I think that on the lunar surface, creating solar power is only half the problem. Finding a way to store it for 2 weeks is perhaps a larger problem,
Yep.
which I think in the technological path is going to lead us to just, bring in some fusion reactors and burying them a couple of kilometers away and be done with it.
Yep, and that's definitely what looks to be happening. Like if you look at NASA's Artemis mission program, they're planning on bringing up probably a Rolls-Royce, but I don't know specifically if there's competitors for that, but a fusion reactor. I think that's probably one of the arguments for space-based, because the other issue with solar panel and direct solar thermal, if we're talking about processing, is again the dust, right? Solar panels kind of require not dusty coatings. So if we had them in orbit, then that's good, but again, it costs money and it's an added layer of complexity to actually launch these things up again.
Yeah.
Well, if you guys want, we could open it up to the rest of the audience, and they can just turn on their mics if they want and just make it an open discussion. How's that sound?
Sure. It's not that big a group, sadly.
No. Nicholas?
Yeah, no, that's good idea.
Sure.
Yeah.
All right, guys. It's an open discussion. If you've got a technology that you think is important, let's talk about it.
Hey guys.
All
All
right.
right. I think James is first here, so Ryan, you need to wait.
Sorry?
There are you and no, you keep the mic on. That's fine. But James was just starting to talk, so let him put his question.
Okay, I feel that finding water and processing it is probably the most significant technology that we can work on, because developing rocket propellant on the moon would allow us to lower the cost of getting further material to the moon to do work.
Yep. There's a lot of people that believe in that getting the fuel is the first step.
Yeah.
Thoughts?
Yeah, I mean that's so you can look up the lunar propellant architectures published in 2019 by Cornuta. Was like a seminal piece there, and that's exactly what they're looking at. It's like, this is how we push this technology forward, because again, that lowers the cost of transport to the moon, which allows us to do a lot more. So I think that's one of the major backers behind NASA and the CNSA going to Shackleton Crater, right? Because we're pretty sure that there's water ice there, and yeah, you're right. If we can make propellant, and that's the next big step forwards.
I would have one question as to would it be best to really get to the moon and begin work there to test out different ideas versus trying to simulate the lunar ice here on Earth?
If we knew what the lunar ice looked like, we would definitely be doing that. Unfortunately, we have no idea. Right? So there's lots of different research that's going on. Colorado School of Mines does some. We've got a university here in Australia called Swinburne that does ice research. So lots of people trying to work out how we could do that. Once we know what the ice looks like, what its morphology is, then yeah, we can go to town. But at the moment, like, we have no idea if it's going to be concrete, if it's going to be super fluffy, if we're going to have these massive ice crystals covered in dust. We have no idea what it's going to look like. So it's very difficult for us to start doing Earth-based research with any confidence until we have at least Viper style mission samples and things like that to say, okay, this is what we're working with. Now we can go to town and work out how to process it well.
So
I
first
think
step would be to.
results.
I'm sorry, what was that?
I think the Viper results are going to be critical, because right now all we know is that at 40 degrees Kelvin, water ice is concrete or granite, more likely. So learning how to deal with it, all we know now is what it looks like after you eject it off the surface with a rocket.
So maybe the first tech is actually getting stuff into these areas and getting some samples.
Yeah.
Yeah. What else you guys got? Ryan?
Ryan McLeod has had came online before, so he might. Do you want to get back, Ryan? Oh, okay. Somebody else? Stanley?
Chris put into the chat, the engineering financial analysis of almost any lunar settlement tech includes the price of getting material from Earth to low Earth orbit and hence onto the moon. As that price drops, it changes what the most efficient solution is to the problem. So one could argue low cost launch technology is the most important tech for establishing a lunar settlement. You guys agree? Is launch cost, is that the driving factor?
Yeah, I would say that.
Oh.
But key
Usability.
thing is we need SpaceX to tell us what its price point will ultimately be with the Starship.
Maybe they don't know yet because they haven't finished
Yeah,
making it.
I'm going to be honest with you. I've been in email contact with someone from SpaceX, and I think they're in price discovery mode, right? So they can charge whatever they want as long as people will pay for it. So they're trying to find out how much people are going to pay for it, right? And it's going to be that state until they have competitors who are going to force them to bring it down. So I think that's why they're not being very open with the price.
Yeah. Sounds likely, yes. Stanley, if you're saying something, you're mute.
We still can't hear you. All right. Well, while we're waiting for Stanley, anybody else got some ideas?
Hey guys, so I'll give you my 2 cents. I think that you're not gonna get your moon base built unless you have something to pay for it, right? You got to find a way to provide value to people on Earth. Best case scenario, you get a politician who decides to, or politicians to build it. The next election comes around and they need to cut costs. It's done, right? So you need to find ways to have income coming in so that you can, even if all of the funding is shut off from Earth, right, it will still survive because you're providing value to people on Earth, they're paying for it. And I think the lowest hanging fruit that's proven for that right now is tourism. We've already seen that people will pay $53 million a seat just to go up into Earth orbit for a week. So how much will they pay to, take a trip to the moon, right? And it's going to be very expensive and out of reach for most people at first. But as I said in the comments, so were cars, right? Back in the day when cars were first invented, it was really only rich hobbyists who had them. But that helped fund things, including Henry Ford, to be able to develop his assembly line to eventually bring down the cost to the point where pretty much anyone could afford a car.
I can ask my question now. I fixed something.
All right, let's hear it.
Okay, so can you just tell me what you were talking about? Connection points between the highlands and the mares. So what are points that what are particular points I could identify for that, please?
Oh, I think it was my presentation. Basically, well, as you said, interface between the highland and the mares. So somewhere along the shore, basically. If the Mare is the ocean, which is what they thought, then somewhere along the coast of that ocean, basically where a settlement can use basalt that's found in the Mare and anorthosite, which is found in the highlands.
So are there particular coordinates you could direct me to?
I would say if you're looking at the moon behind you, anywhere where the white spot meets a dark spot.
All right. Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you. That answers.
Yeah. You just want to basically have the option to gather from multiple suites of materials. And they're significantly different between the Mare and the highlands.
So Apollo 16 and 17, I was just quickly reading it looks like they went to such interfaces. If I'm correct on that, I just did a really quick search on that. So
I'd have to look that
You'd
up.
have to look, all right.
I'm not sure where those two went. I think 15 definitely went to the Highlands. 11 and 12 went to the Mare. 14, I think, might be in an interface, and 16 and 17, I don't remember.
all right, okay, good. Okay, thank you.
Yep. Some of them, were definitely either in one or the other, and then I know a couple of them were definitely at kind of an interface.
Okay, good. Okay, thank you.
Well, and it gets complicated because, the way everything is formed on the moon, you can get Mare material up in the Highlands just because it got blasted out of the Mare and, sent hundreds of kilometers elsewhere. So you do kind of get a little bit of mixing.
Well, I'm just reading it. Somebody responded in the chat. 17 had the most geological diversity because of Harrison Schmidt. Is that like a location?
I think they're saying because he was a trained geologist, so he knew what to look for.
Oh, okay. Oh,
Yeah, the rest of them were just grabbing samples. They didn't really have the training to know, hey, this is pretty interesting, I should grab that.
Okay, good. Okay, thank you very much.
Yep, no problem. Marufa, you have a question?
No, I just want to participate in the panel.
Oh,
Really
yeah.
great conference. I was thinking like what to send in the moon, kind of like, let's say, one of my Russian friends, she's an analog astronaut, so she's sending her DNA. So we could probably send our DNAs. And then also in terms of technology, some of our previous generation, like my uncles or my grandfathers who are kind of grew up in a Star Trek technology when Star Trek was recording. Like, do you think we can go back in terms of technology, or should we go forward? Kind of like time, or those technologies are, how do we validate?
So you're saying like which technologies would be more appropriate? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
Or, yeah. I think we need to look at all technologies and just not just choose the shiniest and the newest just because it is. I think there's a lot of technology that we can spend a little time looking at. Thoughts, guys?
You can always draw from that kind of technology too. One of the really interesting things that's cool about sci-fi is that you'll read these older sci-fi novels and such, and then some of that technology we're way beyond, right? Like our computers these days are ridiculous, but we still don't have large, in orbit facilities. So there's, in some aspects, we're going to be so far beyond that type of Star Trek technology that it's not even funny. But in other options, we're not going to hit faster than light travel for a while now, I'd suggest. So it's a bit of a balance there, right? But it's certainly a good push for innovation, I think, and that's one of the cool things. And if I can completely change directions here, but that's a really good way that we can. So we do a lot of engagement with students, right? Because we need more professionals looking into these areas. And one of the really cool ways that we can do that is say, hey, sci-fi is cool, everybody loves it. Let's get you interested in space. And yes, you're going to have to change what you're thinking about because some of the sci-fi stuff is not really possible yet, right? But we can get people really interested in, and that's how you get cool new innovations that people historically have never even conceptualized of. So that's a really cool idea.
Second question, maybe last question. How do the countries get into these Artemis Accords? Like, is it the country like itself decides, and the space agency in the country, they decide they want to be in the accords, or like Artemis Accords, like all these few countries, like how many countries are in there? Like probably like 34, I don't know how the number. Like how do
I know almost nothing about it, just what I've read, but it just seems to me that a country basically says, well, we agree with that. It sounds good. I don't know if there's like an actual, signatory where you're really like committing to anything. I think most of the time it's just, it's a good idea. We'll go with that.
Thank you.
Yeah. But again, take that for what it is. I'm not an expert.
We're all
I
learning.
would watch this space on that. So the Artemis Accords is a preliminary semi-legal type thing. There's going to have to be some sort of larger international, maybe not treaty, but agreement or something soon. So that's being discussed heavily in the UN, especially in returns to space resources. Obviously, the older, International Space Treaty is outdated in the sense that it kind of specifies that we're not really meant to be using space resources, which we kind of need to. A number of countries like Australia signed on to what we call the Moon Agreement. And that was ironically a bunch of non-spacefaring countries. So anybody that couldn't get to space kind of saying, hey, we don't want you taking space. So that was interesting in a political way. And none of the major spacefaring nations like US or China or Russia signed that. But that one specifically said, no use of resources. You can't own it, which is obviously not going to be a viable strategy. So that's something that the Artemis Accords in Luxembourg, et cetera, kind of saying, well, no, space resources need to be available for private companies, et cetera. So there's going to have to be some bigger international agreement that will, when we're looking at, 20, 30, 40 years in the future when a lunar settlement might happen, that's what's going to happen, right? We're going to have a much larger unilateral agreement that covers all of this stuff. So that'll be probably more important.
Either that or they won't get around to that in time. People will start going out there and getting resources, and then it'll get litigated in the courts. And eventually, through trial and error and a lot of pain and suffering, probably, we will have laws.
Hopefully the other way around, but yes, that's a definite possibility.
Yep. All right, well, since we just opened it up to all topics about the moon, anybody got anything they want to talk about? No shame if you don't. We can definitely wrap this up early. There's no point in dragging it out. What do you think, Nicholas?
Yeah, well, I agree with that. If we're not talking, it's no use sitting here looking at each other. But feel free to suggest any kind of relevant topic. Anyone?
Well, Philip wrote that we need the cheapest technology that allows us to have self-sustaining operation in space.
I will second that one quite strongly. And I think that is also kind of a counter argument to the notion earlier that launch cost is the most important technology. It is until we get there. And if we get there with self-sufficiency and settlers, then suddenly launch cost isn't important anymore.
Yeah, we had a speaker at a previous LDC, Rick Tumlinson, and he's been around for a long time with space exploration and technology. And his topic was basically, we've got enough rockets. We need the stuff that goes in the rockets. We don't have the payloads to make it worthwhile. And that's what everybody should be focusing on. Like, we got rockets, we know how to get there. We don't necessarily need Starship. We can do it without Starship. I mean, we can do it without any reusables. We've done it before. So, but we don't have any of the other technology we need. We don't have the habitats. We don't have the life support. We don't have the power generation. None of that stuff is in a let's go fly it right now state. So his argument was that that's where we need to focus on.
That's not really true for the moon because we've operated submarines for years. In the case of agriculture and using growing plants under lights, we know actually how to do that. But for our basic needs of carbohydrates, we don't do it, because why would anybody bother to spend $50 to grow a pound of potatoes? Unless you're actually on the moon, it costs $200 to ship it from Earth. So we actually know how to do these things, but until the cost comes down in space transportation, we can't afford to get where we want to go. And there's one thing that a lot of people are missing about space transportation, and somewhat that Tomlinson did get right, is that it's not only reusability, but it's the flight rate. You have personnel on the ground, and if they are not being fully utilized, your cost of going into orbit will be high. There was a study that was done on the space shuttle, and their estimate was that reusability with the space shuttle costs like $10 million per launch in the hardware, but the standing army cost $100 million per launch.
Right. But I guess I would argue it depends on what your goal is, right? If you're talking about a base that needs constant resupply, shuttling people back and forth, all that other stuff, that's a completely different animal than talking about settlement, where people go and stay. If you're talking settlement, transportation isn't your biggest issue. It's a one-way ride. You factor that
And
in.
why
and you're
aren't we
done.
there now? Can any of us come up with
None of the
say, "Oh, you know,
technology-
you launch?
None of the technology exists now to go to the moon. There is not a single viable system where you can say, let's launch this today and you can live on the moon. None of that exists. That's why there isn't anything on the moon, because we can't live there. We can go there for very brief stays and come back, but that's it. It's not the launch cost that's slowing us down. It's we don't have any of the other technology needed.
I
If
think
I-
the launch
if I could-
cost is also.
If
I
I
mean,
told you,
if-
if I told you that you could buy a Mark I lunar settlement kit and they could deliver it to the moon in 10 Heavy Falcons or whatever, and for X price, you could do that, you could find the money and go do.
Mm-mm.
If the technology was available, it could be done. But the technology is not available. And that's the
No.
hang up.
It's the money. That is the key problem. It's the cost. You're not going to spend. Okay, if I'm correct with the Starship, it will probably do a price quote of $100 million. I'm sorry, of $100 per pound, which translates to establishing a 12-man base on the moon at about $200 million. $1,000 a pound, it's $2 billion. So if you don't have that money to pay out, and $2 billion, that's the government. $200 million, okay, that's maybe commercial interest. You start getting down to $2 million, then you're looking at private individuals.
With what technology? So you've got launch, so you've got the launch
can
part
transport
handled, but you don't
all
have any of the
equipment.
technology.
I could build a lunar base right now, but how do I ship it to the moon?
I would challenge that you could not build a lunar base right now using current technology.
I'd say you're wrong.
Prove me wrong and go build one.
I would agree with you too, James. I think a lot of it is there, or either available technology or near future technology, but we don't have the funds to pay for it, right? I mean, if you don't have a reason to be there that's going to provide value to Earth one way or the other, you're not going to be able to develop it. You're not even going to get off the ground, right? Because
I mean,
why would taxpayers pay hundreds of billions of dollars for this moon settlement if they're not going to get any direct benefit from it?
I just, unfortunately, I don't see anything really happening until governments get government gets into this big. It really needs government funding to get it going. That's what I think is the situation.
I think the government needs to buy down the risk in developing these technologies, but after that point, then hey, can you not do that, please? After that point, then then private companies can take over and develop them and make them more efficient and cheaper, so that
That's probably true, but government's got to initiate this.
Mhm.
Cost of transportation is going down, so I think James, if you can build a base that can be shipped, then I agree with Ben. Do it. That's a good idea. I'm trying to, by the way.
I mean, there's all kinds of analogs all over the world, but none of them are really an analog for a base. They don't use similar technology. If the technology to build a base was available, somebody would build one and drop it in a desert somewhere. I mean, a real one, not an analog where it's still made out of wood and plastic and, you know, people go outside in simulated spacesuits. I'm talking about they would build a real lunar base or settlement with all the bells and whistles needed to keep somebody alive and drop it in a hostile environment.
Yeah.
And we would say, this is how it works. This is all the real equipment. This is how the systems work together. We can get specs on all of this. And that equipment doesn't exist. Otherwise, somebody would have done it in preparation of actually going to the moon.
I think you could
or
do
just
it.
or just in order to colonize Sahara.
Hostile environment, why not? It'd be a lot easier than settling the moon.
Ryan, I've interrupted you, I think.
All right. All right, any other thoughts? Comments?
It's a bit, this discussion about the transportation or the base technology is a bit like the hen and the egg. What comes first? You have to do something in order to get there, but you have to have something to ship there in order to push down the prices.
That's
I'm
true.
curious- Sorry
Go
to
ahead.
interrupt. I'm curious, how do we name the locations? For example, we have like Einstein crater or Copernicus or all these famous scientists. Like, how do we name the locations on the moon? How does it work?
Anybody have an idea on that? I mean, I think there's a naming committee, right? An international naming committee. I don't know. I think a lot of them are
Yeah.
historical, right? They were named hundreds of years ago when they were first seen.
Somewhere.
If you build it, you
Yeah.
name it.
Yeah, like you say, it's a committee that works out of, I think, the International Astronomy people. So
International Astronomical Union, IAU.
Yeah, that sounds right. Yep.
they probably have similar criterion like the military has for naming of bases. They have certain criteria that says, okay, we can name it if the person did this, and this, like military bases cannot be named after a living person. They have to be named after a dead person.
Yeah, there's a lot of rules in that, but I think James is right. Eventually people are going to go there and they're going to name it whatever they want if they don't like the existing name, and that'll probably just be that. All right, anybody else? Otherwise, we'll just wrap this up and do it again tomorrow.
Yep. Thank you, all
right.
the speakers and everybody else who has been here.
Very good.
Been a
Very
great, great day and quite interesting. And
Yep.
yeah, see you again tomorrow.
Yeah, thanks
Thanks all.
everyone.
Have a good one.
Appreciate it.